The small town of Maplewood hadn't seen a funeral this well attended in years. Nearly everyone knew Richard Bennett, local business owner, community volunteer, and by all accounts, a devoted father to 8-year-old Lily. The day was appropriately somber, with grey clouds hanging low in the sky, threatening rain that had yet to fall. Richard Bennett touched all of our lives, Pastor Wilson said from behind the polished wooden podium. His generosity knew no bounds, his smile could brighten the darkest day, and his commitment to this community will leave a legacy that endures long after we lay him to rest. Detective Sarah Mercer stood at the back of the crowd, observing the proceedings with professional detachment. She hadn't known Richard personally, but the circumstances of his death, a car found abandoned near Ridgeview Cliff, presumed suicide after financial troubles came to light, had landed on her desk. Standard procedure dictated she attend the funeral, watching for anything unusual. The closed casket sat at the front of the room, draped with a spray of white lilies. Beside it sat Richard's widow, Elena, dressed in black, her face partially hidden behind a veil. Next to her was Lily, small and fragile in a navy blue dress, her blonde hair tied back with a ribbon that matched. The child hadn't spoken since the night her father disappeared, according to the case file. And now Pastor Wilson continued, Richard's daughter, Lily, would like to say a few words. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Elena looked startled, but after a brief hesitation she nodded, squeezing her daughter's shoulder. Lily approached the podium, a folded piece of paper clutched in her small hand. Detective Mercer straightened, suddenly alert. Something about the girl's determined walk, the set of her small shoulders, triggered her investigative instincts. Lily stood on tiptoes to reach the microphone. Her voice, when it finally came, was clear and unwavering. "My daddy isn't dead," she said simply. The crowd fell silent. Elena rushed forward, her face a mask of embarrassment and grief, but Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. "He told me he had to go away for a while. He said people were after him, but that I shouldn't be scared. He said to look for the Blue Jay when I missed him." Elena reached the podium, attempting to gently pull her daughter away, murmuring apologies about childhood grief and denial. But Detective Mercer was already moving forward, her mind racing. There had been no suicide note, no body recovered from the ravine below the cliff, just a car with the driver's door open and Richard's wallet left on the seat. And there was something else, something that had bothered her from the beginning. Richard Bennett's life insurance policy, updated just 3 months ago, worth $2 million. As Elena led her daughter back to their seats, the detective noticed something fall from Lily's pocket, a small blue origami bird. Detective Sarah Mercer had built her career on noticing what others missed. At 36, she'd become the youngest detective in Maplewood's small police department, earning respect through methodical work and unwavering dedication. But beneath her professional exterior lay wounds that had never fully healed. Her own father had disappeared when she was 12, a case that remained unsolved despite her efforts to find answers after joining the force. She watched Lily now, seeing echoes of herself in the little girl's determined stance. Sarah's colleagues had attributed Richard Bennett's disappearance to suicide, pointing to his failing business and recent withdrawal from social circles. But something had never felt right about the case. "You really think there's something to what the kid said?" asked Officer Jenkins, appearing at her side as the funeral began to disperse. "Children often know more than we give them credit for," Sarah replied, her eyes still on Lily, "and they rarely have reason to lie." Across the room, Elena Bennett was the picture of a grieving widow gracefully accepting condolences, one arm perpetually around her daughter's shoulders. Sarah had interviewed her twice after Richard's disappearance, finding nothing suspicious in her demeanor. Elena had seemed genuinely distraught, explaining that Richard had been depressed for months as his construction business faltered under mounting debt. "He just couldn't see a way out," Elena had told Sarah, dabbing at her eyes. "I should have seen the signs." Now, watching mother and daughter, Sarah noticed a tension between them that hadn't been there during the interviews. Elena's grip on Lily's shoulder seemed less comforting and more restraining. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat in her modest office, Richard Bennett's case file spread across her desk. The financial records told a confusing story. Yes, his business had been struggling, but there were unexplained transfers to offshore accounts in the months before his disappearance. Not large amounts, but consistent. as if he'd been preparing for something. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Chief Parker, his expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. "Tell me you're not reopening the Bennett case based on what an 8-year-old said at a funeral," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm just being thorough, Chief. Something doesn't add up." "What doesn't add up is spending department resources on a clear suicide when we have actual murders to solve," he replied. "The guy was drowning in debt, his business was failing. But his body was never found," Sarah interjected, "and there's the matter of the life insurance policy." Chief Parker sighed. 2-year suicide clause. "Elena Bennett won't see a penny of that money." "Unless it wasn't suicide," Sarah pointed out. "Unless it was made to look that way." The chief's expression hardened. "You have until the end of the week. Then this case goes back on the shelf where it belongs." After he left, Sarah turned her attention to the one piece of evidence she hadn't fully explored: Richard's cell phone records. The phone itself had been in the car, but the call history revealed something interesting: multiple calls to a prepaid number in the weeks before his disappearance, a number that had never been traced. On impulse, Sarah decided to visit the Bennett home unannounced. As she pulled into the driveway of the modest suburban house, she noticed a blue jay perched on the mailbox, an ordinary sight, except for Lily's words echoing in her mind. "He said to look for the blue jay when I missed him." Elena answered the door, surprise evident on her face. "Detective Mercer, is something wrong?" "Just following up," Sarah said smoothly. "May I come in?" The house was immaculate, showing no signs of the chaos grief often brings. As Elena prepared coffee in the kitchen, Sarah noticed Lily in the backyard, sitting alone on a swing set, something blue clutched in her hands. "How is Lily doing?" Sarah asked when Elena returned with 2 cups. "As well as can be expected," Elena replied, her voice measured. "Children process grief differently. Her therapist says the denial is normal." "And the blue jay reference?" Elena's hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. "Richard used to tell her stories about blue jays, said they were messengers between worlds. Childish nonsense, but she loved it." Sarah nodded, then asked casually, "Were you aware of any offshore accounts Richard might have had?" The color drained from Elena's face. "Excuse me, just routine questions," Sarah assured her. "We're trying to get a complete financial picture." "Richard handled our finances," Elena said stiffly. "If he had other accounts, I wasn't aware of them." Sarah left shortly afterward, more convinced than ever that something was amiss. As she walked to her car, she caught sight of Lily watching her from the window, her small hand pressed against the glass. The little girl held up what Sarah now saw was a collection of blue origami birds, identical to the one that had fallen at the funeral. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her office to find an envelope on her desk, unmarked except for her name written in block letters. Inside was a single blue feather and a note with coordinates. No explanation, no signature. "Where did this come from?" she demanded of the front desk officer. "Mail drop. No return address." Sarah entered the coordinates into her GPS. They pointed to a location in the dense woods that bordered Maplewood to the north, Blue Ridge Forest, a sprawling wilderness area popular with hikers and campers. Without hesitation, she grabbed her jacket and keys. The drive took 40 minutes, the last 10 on an unpaved forest road. The coordinates led to a small clearing, unremarkable except for a weathered cabin partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. Sarah approached cautiously, hand on her holstered weapon. The cabin appeared abandoned, dust thick on the windows, but as she circled to the back, she noticed fresh footprints in the soft earth. The back door was secured with a padlock that showed signs of recent use: no rust, the keyhole clear of debris. Sarah documented everything with her phone camera before returning to her vehicle. A property search revealed the cabin belonged to a James Wilson, no relation to Pastor Wilson, she confirmed, who had died 3 years ago. The property had never been sold, caught in probate due to disputed ownership among distant relatives. Perfect for someone who needed to disappear temporarily. Back at the station, Sarah dug deeper into Richard Bennett's life. His construction company had primarily built residential homes, but in the past year he'd taken on several commercial projects, including renovations at Maplewood City Hall, specifically the evidence room of the police department. "What were you involved in?" Sarah murmured to herself. A search of local cases revealed something significant 6 months before Richard's disappearance. A major drug bust had resulted in the seizure of over $2 million in cash and narcotics. The money was logged into evidence, awaiting the trial of Martin Reeves, a notorious dealer who'd finally been caught after years of investigation. And who had been in charge of that investigation? Chief Parker himself. Sarah felt a chill as connections began forming in her mind. The renovation project, the offshore transfers, the missing money from the evidence room, discovered only after Richard's disappearance and attributed to clerical error. The Blue Jay, not just a children's story, but the call sign for an FBI operation that had been targeting corrupt officers across the state, according to a law enforcement bulletin she'd read months ago. Could Richard Bennett have discovered something during those renovations? Something that made him a threat? As if summoned by her thoughts, Chief Parker appeared in her doorway. "Time's up, Mercer. The Bennett case is closed." Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "You're right, Chief. I was overthinking it." After he left, Sarah made 2 calls, one to an FBI contact she'd worked with on a previous case, and another to Lily Bennett, requesting another interview the following day. To her surprise, Lily agreed immediately. That night, Sarah returned to the cabin, this time with a bolt cutter hidden in her jacket. The interior was sparse but showed signs of recent habitation: a sleeping bag, a lantern, food wrappers in the trash. On the table sat a stack of blue origami paper and several completed birds. A sound outside sent her reaching for her weapon. The door creaked open to reveal a man she didn't recognize, tall, bearded, wearing flannel and jeans. "Detective Mercer," he said. Not a question, but a statement. "Richard said you might figure it out." "Who are you?" "The name's Michael. I'm Richard's brother." Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face. "Half-brother," he clarified. "Different mothers, different names. We kept it quiet for reasons that should now be obvious." "Where is Richard?" Michael hesitated. "That depends on whether you're here as Richard's ally or his enemy." "I'm here for the truth," Sarah replied firmly. After a long moment, Michael nodded. "Richard is alive. He's in protective custody with the FBI. Has been since the night he disappeared." Over the next hour, Michael laid out a story that confirmed Sarah's suspicions and added new details. Richard had indeed discovered something during the police station renovations. A hidden camera he'd installed had captured Chief Parker and 2 officers removing evidence from the seized drug money. Richard didn't know what to do, Michael explained. He started gathering evidence, making copies, securing proof. But they figured out someone was watching. The threats Lily mentioned. Michael nodded. Richard received anonymous calls. Then his brakes failed accident that wasn't an accident. He contacted the FBI, but he needed to disappear while they built their case. And the cliff. The abandoned car, staged with FBI help. They needed everyone to believe he was dead, especially Chief Parker and his accomplices. What about Elena and Lily? Michael's expression grew troubled. That's the problem. Richard wanted to take them with him into witness protection, but Elena refused. Said she wouldn't uproot Lily's life for what might be nothing. But Lily knows her father is alive, Sarah pointed out. Kids are perceptive. Richard couldn't bear to leave without saying goodbye. He promised her he'd return when it was safe, gave her the Blue Jay signal. Sarah processed this information, her mind already racing ahead. The funeral today, why now? The FBI is moving on Parker tomorrow. They needed to ensure Richard was officially dead first, to protect him when everything goes public. As Sarah drove back to town, she realized she'd been given a choice: remain silent for one more day and let justice take its course, or risk everything by involving herself. The detective in her demanded action, but the strategist understood patience. Her decision was made for her when she arrived at her apartment to find the door ajar, lights off. Drawing her weapon, she entered cautiously, finding the place ransacked. On her bed lay a child's drawing, a stick figure family with a blue bird overhead, and in a child's handwriting, help. Dawn found Sarah parked a block from the Bennett house, watching as an unmarked van idled across the street. Through binoculars, she identified the driver as Officer Brooks, one of Chief Parker's closest allies on the force. Her phone vibrated with a text from her FBI contact: operation delayed. Leak suspected. Proceed with caution. Sarah's heart sank. The FBI raid wouldn't be coming today, which meant Elena and Lily were in immediate danger. If Parker had discovered Richard was working with the FBI, he'd need leverage, and what better leverage than a man's family? Weighing her options, Sarah decided on a direct approach. She drove to the Bennett house, parking conspicuously in the driveway. Officer Brooks wouldn't intervene with a detective on the scene, not without orders. Elena answered the door, her composed facade cracking slightly when she saw Sarah. "Detective, I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon. May I come in?" "It's urgent." Inside, Sarah noticed subtle signs of disruption: a picture frame slightly askew, a chair not fully pushed under the dining table. "Where's Lily?" Sarah asked immediately. "At school," Elena replied, but her eyes flickered toward the staircase. "Elena," Sarah said quietly, "I know about Richard. I know he's alive and why he disappeared." Elena's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. And I think you're in danger, you and Lily both. Chief Parker knows Richard is working with the FBI." The mention of Parker's name caused a visible reaction, fear flashing across Elena's face before she controlled it. "Chief Parker was here last night," Sarah continued, gambling on her hunch. "He threatened you, didn't he? Used Lily to ensure your cooperation." Elena's composure finally crumbled. "He has men watching the house. Said if I told anyone, if I tried to leave." She trailed off, glancing again toward the stairs. "Lily didn't go to school today, did she?" Elena shook her head, tears forming. "She's hiding in the attic. Parker said he'd be back this afternoon to escort us to a safe location." "I know what that means." Sarah's mind raced. "We need to get you both out now. Is there a back way?" "The neighbor's yard connects to ours. There's a gate in the fence, hidden by the hedge." Sarah checked her watch. It was 8:30 a.m., hours before Parker would return, but with Brooks watching the front, they needed a distraction. "Call this number," Sarah said, writing down her FBI contact's information. "Tell them exactly what's happening. Then get Lily and be ready to move when I create a diversion." Outside, Sarah approached her car casually, then deliberately knocked over Elena's garbage cans, making a show of cleaning up the mess. As expected, Brooks' attention was fixed on her. Sarah called the station on her cell phone, speaking loudly enough to be overheard. "This is Detective Mercer. I need a forensics team at the Bennett residence immediately. I've discovered evidence related to Richard Bennett's case." She disconnected, then climbed into her car and drove away, watching in her rearview mirror as Brooks hastily made a call of his own. She circled the block, abandoning her car on a side street before doubling back through the adjoining yards. Elena and Lily were waiting by the back gate, the little girl clutching her blue origami birds. "The FBI agent is sending someone," Elena whispered. "Said to get to the North Forest cabin." "Then that's where we'll go," Sarah decided. "My car is 2 blocks over." They moved through backyards and side streets, avoiding main roads. Sarah kept Lily between them, the child unusually calm despite the situation. "Are we going to see Daddy?" Lily asked as they reached Sarah's car. Soon, Sarah promised, helping her into the back seat. They were 3 miles from town when Sarah spotted the police cruiser in her rearview mirror, lights activated. She accelerated, taking the turn toward Blue Ridge Forest at dangerous speed. "Hold on," she warned as the cruiser gave chase. The forest road was narrow and winding, dirt and gravel spraying as Sarah pushed her sedan to its limits. The cruiser stayed close, gaining ground on the straightaways. There, Elena pointed to a barely visible turn-off. Sarah took it, branches scraping the car's sides as they bumped along what was little more than a game trail. The cruiser followed, closer now. Ahead, the cabin came into view, and beside it, 3 unmarked SUVs. FBI agents in tactical gear emerged, weapons raised. Sarah braked hard, throwing the car into park. Out, run to the cabin. Elena and Lily scrambled from the car as the cruiser skidded to a halt behind them. Chief Parker emerged, weapon drawn. "Mercer, stand down." Sarah took cover behind her car door. "It's over, Chief. The FBI has the evidence." Parker's face contorted with rage. Nobody had to get hurt. Bennett should have minded his own business. "Daddy did the right thing," Lily called out unexpectedly, standing her ground despite Elena's attempts to pull her toward the cabin. He said bad people sometimes wear badges too. Parker's attention shifted to Lily, his weapon following his gaze. It was the opening Sarah needed. She lunged forward, tackling him as FBI agents converged from all directions. In the chaos that followed, Sarah found herself sitting on the cabin steps, an FBI medic bandaging a cut on her arm. Beside her, Lily was piecing together another origami bird. "Your dad taught you to make those?" Sarah asked. Lily nodded. "He said as long as the blue jays fly, he'll always find his way home." As if in response, the cabin door opened, and a clean-shaven man stepped out. Richard Bennett, alive and whole. Lily's face lit up with joy as she ran to him, Elena following more slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," Richard said to Sarah over his daughter's head. For believing her when no one else would. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the courthouse corridor as the jury returned with their verdict. Chief Parker and his accomplices were found guilty on all counts: corruption, evidence tampering, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Richard Bennett, the state's key witness, sat with his family in the front row. After the verdict was read, he approached Sarah, hand extended. "Justice served," he said simply. "Not without cost," Sarah replied, thinking of the town's shattered trust in law enforcement, the officers whose reputations were tarnished by association. But with hope for rebuilding, Elena added, joining them. She'd changed in the past month, stronger now, more confident. "We're staying in Maplewood. Richard's starting a new business, and I'm running for town council." Lily appeared between them, offering Sarah a blue origami bird. "Dad says you should keep this, for good luck in finding lost things." Sarah accepted the gift, thinking of her own father, wondering if now might be the time to reopen that investigation. Some mysteries, she was beginning to believe, were meant to be solved. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, cameras ready. Sarah stepped aside, letting the Bennett family take center stage. This was their story of courage, of a father's love, of a little girl whose simple truth had brought down corruption that had festered for years. As Richard began to speak to the press, Sarah noticed a blue jay perched on a nearby tree, watching the proceedings with bright, intelligent eyes. She smiled, remembering Lily's words at the funeral that had started it all: "My daddy isn't dead." Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most important evidence came from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes justice depended not on forensics or ballistics or witness testimony, but on the unwavering faith of a child who refused to believe the lie everyone else had accepted. She tucked the paper bird into her pocket and headed back to the station. There were other cases waiting, other truths to uncover, other families who deserved answers. And perhaps, somewhere in her father's case file, there was a detail everyone had missed: a blue jay she hadn't known to look for.